Something's not right. Chapter 1. The show must go on. Some have compared getting truth out of an abuser to nailing Jell-O to a wall. If caught, they'll use any tactic necessary to wiggle free, to evade accusation, to save face, to preserve their power and influence. By having a clear picture of the tactics abusers are likely to employ, we are less likely to be taken in by their practice description. This is why we must learn and understand the field of impression management research. The best explanation I've read of impression management is from the late Canadian sociologist Erving Goffman, who defined it as the process of creating, influencing, or manipulating an image held by an audience. Like Goffman, Goffman, I find impression management best understood by using the metaphor of a stage play. Individuals or organizations are actors on a stage, and at any point they are either behind the curtain or in front of the curtain. The play, what the audience sees, reflects the stage version of the actor. The actor strives to give the audience what they want, knowing that his relationship with the audience depends on it. That is the only way the show can continue. The audience reacts, and the actor adjusts his performance based on those reactions to keep the audience engaged. And then we have some images on page 11 and 10. Now I'm going to go over to page 12. Behind the curtain, however, is a different world. The audience can no longer see the actor. Behind the curtain, he can practice his performance, thinking of ways he can allure and appeal to the audience, developing who he is for the front stage act. The audience will never see this hidden side of him. Now, the truth is we all are actors in our own lives, alternating between front stage and backstage behaviors as we go throughout our day. Our behavior in the privacy of our homes is different from our behaviors in public. We change out of our pajamas before heading out the door in the morning, and the way we behave with clients is usually more professional than the way we relax at the end of the workday. Even certain rooms in our homes are kept cleaner than others, just as in case someone stops in for a visit. This is normal. But the impression management becomes unethical when the front stage persona is used to hide truths that ought not to be hidden. An abuser, for example, will use the tactics of impression management when grooming potential victims to conceal nefarious intent. An abuser or those seeking to protect the abuser might use the tactics of impression management to appear untrustworthy while keeping the truth of the abuse behind the curtain, or to explain the abuse away if the curtain is pulled back to reveal the backstage behavior. Before we can learn the specific tactics of impression management as they relate to abuse, which we will explore in the coming chapters, we need to first consider what factors prime an environment for abuse. Now on page 13, keeping secrets. Gloria could feel her heart racing. Anxiety and fear always seemed to send her blood pumping before she was conscious that something was wrong. She wanted to walk out of the meeting. Do I really need to do this? She thought. Maybe I'm making too much of it. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a few seconds, as she had learned to do over the years, and she found herself easing back into a state of rest. He may have done this to others, she reminded herself, and I can't keep carrying this secret. So how can we help you? John asked. John was a board member and the vice president at the university. He was joined by the new head of human resources. Everyone knew John handled things at the university, and this meeting was no different. Gloria spent the next 45 minutes telling the story of how a longtime professor had repeatedly made sexual advances towards her over the 5 years she had worked with him. She was prepared to answer questions, but they didn't have any. She offered to share correspondence and other evidence, but John didn't feel it necessary. John suggested there might be some misunderstanding, alluded to the professor's outgoing personality, and assured her that it would be taken care of. Before she left, John mentioned how sensitive this information was and that she should keep it to herself for her own benefit. Gloria didn't understand why they had seemed so unmoved by her story. It made her feel as if she wasn't being heard or taken seriously. It was as if she was reading a story to someone who had heard it many times before. This was because they had heard it before, from multiple women who had recounted similar experiences. Professor Simon was the university's most sought-after faculty member. He had been there long enough to have an academic building bear his name. Students were drawn to him. He made learning fun and seemed to come alive during a lecture. But his assistants knew a different side of him, an entitled and impatient person who always got his way. And some of the women came to learn that he even believed it was his right to claim them as his own. But the powers above him needed his reputation to remain intact. If his backstage behaviors were exposed, it would shock the entire campus and community. They needed to keep this behind the curtain. They thought if they simply talked to Professor Simon, this behavior would change. But confronting him had the opposite effect. Talking without administering consequences made it clear to the professor that he could get away with his abusive behavior because the leadership would cover for him. Little did Gloria know the walls within which she told her story were already plastered with secrets. The professor kept his abuse a secret from students, most colleagues, and the public. John and a few others at the top of the organization kept the reports a secret to maintain the university's reputation. And the women each kept their stories to themselves, thinking they were alone in their experience. The chief desire of abusive individuals and organizations is to attain or retain power. Let me say that. The chief desire of abusive individuals and organizations is to attain or retain power. Most often, the kind of power gained and held firm through deception. The person who abuses others feels the freedom to do so because of their power. And as their power grows, the individual or organization is free to abuse others with greater frequency and less resistance. If power is maintained through deception, deception is maintained through secrecy. Abusers rely upon their ability to remain hidden, and as we'll see, evil knows the best place to hide are those least likely to be searched and among people least likely to suspect abuse. Churches, as I have learned in my research, can easily become havens for abusers for these very reasons, yet we are still surprised when we discover abusers trying to crouch behind crosses and prowl among the pews. And nothing stays hidden without help. Nothing stays hidden without help. It takes others to keep a secret of abuse. Abusers often have to rely upon other people's cooperation to keep their show going. Just as most stage plays have a cast of actors, Goffman calls those who cooperate in the show performance teams. Consciously or not, people end up working together to protect secrets, often by managing the flow of information. For example, organizations often try to save face after a scandal by over-communicating some facts and under-communicating others to the audience. Whether the audience is the public, other members of the organization, the media, victims, or the civil authorities, the abuser and the performance teams around them omit or undercommunicate what Goffman calls disruptive information, facts that threaten the audience's image of the abuser. At the same time, the abuser and performance teams selectively disclose information that improves the abuser's image. It's information control. All the actors do what they can to keep the audience from gaining disruptive information that would redefine what they're seeing. I sat in one meeting where senior leadership acknowledged numerous failures to the rest of the staff. They knew an employee had caused significant harm, but did nothing to confront him or have him removed until the staff began writing letters to the board. The staff was upset with the entire senior leadership for enabling the abuse and looking the other way. The senior leadership called a meeting where they presented a catalog of wrongs, which looked like an act of tremendous transparency. They were thanked and applauded for it. But the most disruptive information, the facts that could have disclosed the full extent of the abuse, remained a secret. The audience's approval was based on a limited view of the situation. It was obscurity disguised as transparency. Secrets can be potent in this kind of environment. Secrets can be potent in the right kind of environment, allowing deception to fester and evil to rule. Most of us probably think we have a basic understanding of what secrets are and how they function. In reality, the depth of power and the breadth of function can make them incredibly complex. According to Goffman, there are 5 types of secrets: dark, strategic, inside, entrusted, and free. Dark secrets, which we'll discuss throughout this book, are facts a person or an organization knows and conceals because if they were revealed, they would damage the image of that person or organization. Allegations of abuse, for example, are a common type of dark secret. Leaders of an organization may go to great lengths to hide an abuse allegation instead of reporting it because they know it would damage the organization's reputation. They want to be seen as a place where dark secrets do not exist. Any secret that an organization keeps hidden to give it an upper hand in its dealings is a strategic secret. In this case, an organization might keep its plans for a merger with another organization a secret, knowing that such information might disrupt the merger if leaked. Strategic secrets allow an organization to be nimble and adjust for any type of response. Inside secrets keep the information between a small, tight-knit group within a larger body, for example, between a few close associates, rather than an entire leadership team, or between a few friends planning a surprise birthday party for another friend. Inside secrets can include dark and strategic secrets, but may also include secrets that would not be disruptive if leaked. Inside secrets involve being in the know and often come with a feeling of exclusivity. That in itself can be dangerous to sometimes abusers. So sometimes feeling of exclusivity, that in itself can be dangerous. So sometimes abusers will ask their victims to keep secrets as part of the grooming process, knowing that secret keeping can be a shortcut to isolation. Even if inside secrets are not inherently dark, they can still be used in unethical ways. For example, many victims have found that their report of abuse to an organization was handled by a dedicated response team or kept within a small group of board members instead of shared with the entire board. In Gloria's story, at the start of this section, her report was kept as an inside secret with John and the human resources directors and wasn't spread further. Some abusive organizations create structures like this for the sole purpose of keeping certain secrets inside secrets, knowing that as the information reaches new people, the chances of that information becoming disruptive increases. Similar to inside secrets, entrusted secrets aren't inherently dark. A secret is entrusted if the relationship calls for confidentiality. Information shared between a patient and a therapist, or between close friends, for example, is usually an entrusted secret. Keeping these secrets is not necessarily wrong, although in some cases, like child abuse, the person entrusted with the secret might have a duty to report it. Last, free secrets are those that do not threaten the image of the person holding the secret. The person who reveals information you entrusted to them might view it as a free secret instead of an entrusted secret, something to share with others for the thrill of gossip or to damage your reputation. To them, the secret is free because sharing doesn't cost them anything. Whistleblowers are often keepers of free secrets. While the information they have may be damaging to an organization, it is not damaging to themselves personally. This is why those who serve in advocacy roles must take great care to handle information carefully and with integrity. These different kinds of secrets may seem like a purely academic distinction, but a greater understanding of and language for these abstract concepts is the beginning of your freedom journey. When you understand how abusers and their performance teams often defend cover-ups by claiming a need for confidentiality, masking a dark secret under the guise of another more legitimate secret, you can begin to find your footing and speak clearly about your experience. An adult, for example, might claim confidentiality and trusted secret when confessing their addiction to child pornography to a pastor or a counselor. And while that relationship might usually provide confidentiality, in this case a dark secret, the pastor or counselor has an obligation to report it to the police. The claim to confidentiality is overruled by the need to protect children. Or an unethical business practice such as tax evasion, a dark secret, might be treated instead as confidential information necessary to run the business, a strategic secret, or as an invitation to a junior partner to join the privileged ranks of those in the know, an inside secret. Abusive situations are often covered up by treating dark secrets as another kind of secret, spreading responsibility to those who, even unwillingly, keep the secret because they do not feel free to share it without harming others themselves. Secrets are also a powerful factor in an abusive environment. Now we're at 19 there, and I'm going to remind you, this is about our ethical will, and we're talking in terms of our experiences in life. And I'll continue from 19 because they can be used. Let me see where we left off here. We said secrets are also a powerful factor in an abusive environment because they can be used as tests of loyalty. I experienced the power of dark inside secrets while I was navigating the abusive culture of the church I worked for. Only certain board members, those who were closer to the senior pastor, were kept in a loop, while the other board members did not have access to all the information. This made it extremely difficult to work toward justice in the church and kept an abusive culture alive. We must grasp the harm that is caused not just by abusers, but also by those who fail to stop abuse and instead protect dark secrets. Our communities, schools, churches, and homes are safer when they are free of such secrets because victims no longer have to keep their stories hidden for fear of how they will be treated, either by abusers or by those who should be on their side. Instead, they are able to release their secrets and say to abusers and their enablers, "I am no longer yours." Each time we believe and advocate for sick victims, walls are broken down, truth is revealed, and hope is restored. Sacred roles. Let me repeat that. Each time we believe and advocate for victims, walls are broken down, truth is revealed, and hope is restored. Sacred roles. Stephen seemed to relish the new position he had at the church. He immediately noticed people were calling him Pastor Steve. At first it felt odd, but it grew on him, and soon he was referring to himself as Pastor Steve in correspondence and introductions. More and more people were asking him to pray at various functions, oversee ceremonies, like weddings and funerals, dedicate children, and baptize new believers. His preaching also took on a new kind of bravado. It had a sort of swagger to it, as if the substance was in the style itself. Some church members began to feel he was too domineering, but few could get away with offering recommendations or critiques. He walled himself off from criticism, and when criticism did make its way through to him, he felt blindsided and wondered why people weren't assertive to begin with. He claimed his door was always open, but fewer and fewer people felt the freedom to approach him. More attributed it to his heavy workload and leadership style. Some found him confident and sure of himself. They liked having a leader who seemed to control. The truth was that he felt insecure, but wanted to live up to his position at the church. So he ignored his inadequacies and acted qualified. When a crisis unfolded, he quickly dismissed requests for outside assistance, concerned that asking for help would make him look incompetent. He put all of his energy into his preaching and making the church as attractive as possible. As the church grew in numbers, this role grew in importance. People began to see him as the person God had placed in the community. For such a time as this, eventually, Pastor Steve could not keep the stories of his domineering backstage behavior from getting out. By then, the church felt they needed him. More than that, they needed the role he occupied and had transformed. The role itself needing protecting if the church was to continue to grow. The person who occupies a position of power and deference with which they are treated because of the position is another important factor in creating an abusive environment. Let me repeat that. The person who occupies a position of power and the deference with which they are treated because of that position is another important factor in creating an abusive environment. If we return to the analogy of the play, audience expectations affect how people in different roles are perceived. People in power learn to perform in a manner consistent with the role they have been given. In churches, for example, the roles of pastor, priest, preacher, and prophet often come with high expectations, one of which might be a supernatural calling. Those who occupy those roles, then, are not created as ordinary people, but as recipients of God's anointing, giving them implicit power over their congregants. We can see this in politics, too. When people censure the conduct of a politician or an advocate for their impeachment, they argue that the politician has disgraced the office, not just himself or herself. The argument is that the politician should be held to a higher standard because of their role. I call these special positions sacred roles because they are invested with sanctity. They are seen as different, special, or set apart. Yet it is precisely in the sanctity of these roles that the danger lies. Protecting a role's sanctity can become a motivation for hiding wrongs. The more leaders and their communities treasure these roles, the more they will see exposure as a threat, as a way to bring about disgrace to the role itself, threatening the roles, and even the community's legitimacy. The greater the threat, the greater the likelihood of a cover-up. The role, not the community, not the victim, not even justice, is what must be preserved at all costs. This kind of power and identity is tempting to those who struggle to sustain spiritual and emotional health. If a leader comes to a sacred role empty, narcissistic, and hungry, they'll likely feverishly quest for legitimacy and meaning, collecting audiences, platforms, awards, and luxuries to justify the position and their title. They begin to see people as objects to be manipulated, shaped, and molded to fit their own agenda and to further serve the role. This isn't to say all sacred roles are exploited by abusive individuals. Despite the frequent news stories about scandals in churches and political arenas, there are still many pastors and politicians who serve with integrity and use their sacred roles for the good of others. Sacred roles are, however, vulnerable to abuse, especially when we are not aware of warning signs. There are a few telltale symptoms to watch out for that can help protect sacred roles from being pirated by abusers. First, the leader must insist on exercising their role in every scenario, even if they lack the expertise and resources necessary to be the decision maker. Take, for example, the spiritual leader who, when faced with reports of child abuse in their congregation, chooses to handle the reports personally instead of involving law enforcement. Leaders can act as if they have the knowledge and skills to respond to an abusive situation, but in reality, most possess little experience or competency. This is page 24, 25, 26. I'm going to hold off there. We're still on the show must go on. And I didn't realize it went that far, but I think it's plenty. We're at almost a half hour. I want to keep these a little bit short. And room for commentary. It's meant as not just a book reading, but as commentary. What we've experienced in the Catholic Church is exactly what this man is writing. And not only that, but if you begin to, the show must go on no matter what. The show must go on. People, justice, everything else is taken to the wayside. So that's what caused many of us to consider something's not right here. So in your ethical will, when we begin to think about the family and we begin to think about other things, how do we respond? Some have just left the church. Some have thought, well, how did they do this in the past? And we came across the corporal works of mercy, the Catholic terminology, doing good. So we have the good we can do that is corporal in this tangible, physical, and the good we can do that is not so tangible but spiritual. And there's lots that we can develop on that. But that's what happened. And in that search, we come across Wade Mullen, who's now finished his PhD, Dr. Wade Mullen, who it's just like he lived our life. When he's talking like this, we think, wow, this guy has experienced that. And so we reach out, and again, because family's everything. And you're going to be telling your kids there are people who are going to, I think the term's gaslight, falsely accuse them. Tell them they have devils in them. Tell them that they're mentally ill. Tell them that what they saw they didn't really see. So how do we respond to that? And what can we do to make our communities better? Guardian Mike, the TV here, has to do with those activities to take in order to make our world a safer place, to resist malevolence and to reduce suffering, resisting malevolence and reducing suffering. So these are just tools. We've never done this before. The job will teach us how to do that. And like you, if you come to this with no competence, you'll get the competence. It will happen. You'll get better at that. So again, we want to encourage you. Things are broken. Educational system is broken. The courts are broken. Our churches are broken. And we're not getting a lot of help from a lot of people that we would expect. So we have that feeling of betrayal. In that thought process, there are lots of resources, lots of people doing good, lots of information that's helpful. And so I hope some of this is helpful for those who are struggling with the entire process. All right? In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.